January 2nd, 1990. Northampton Park, Rochester. A man is sitting in a van, eating his lunch. A sandwich. Maybe a coffee. Windows slightly fogged from the cold. He looks like someone killing time on a work break. Officers pull up. Routine. They are following a lead from a helicopter that spotted something suspicious a few miles away. They tap on the window. He rolls it down. Smiles. Cooperates completely. He tells them his name without being pushed. When they ask for a license, he says he does not have one. When they ask why, he tells them he has been in prison before, for manslaughter. And then he just waits, relaxed, unhurried, like a man with nothing to hide. His name was Arthur Shawcross. He was a convicted offender who had already taken the lives of 2 children 18 years earlier. He had been living in Rochester for nearly 2 years. He had a job, a girlfriend, a routine. He had been released early, moved quietly, his files sealed, and Rochester never got the memo. Arthur John Shawcross, born June 6, 1945. Kittery, Maine, oldest of 4. The family moved to Watertown, New York while he was young. Watertown is a small city near Lake Ontario, the kind of place where you know your neighbors, you recognize faces, and someone new gets noticed. From an early age, something was off. He wet the bed well into his childhood. He set fires regularly, not once or twice, but repeatedly, in a pattern that people around him noticed and nobody addressed. He had almost no real friendships. He spent most of his time alone in fields and wooded areas outside town. School records noted he was difficult to manage, not because he was loud or disruptive, but because he was distant in a way that nobody quite knew what to do with. Teachers flagged it. Nothing changed. He also claimed, in later years, that his home life involved serious mistreatment, that his mother harmed him repeatedly in ways that left a lasting mark. His family rejected every single claim. His parents and siblings said none of it was true. There is no independent way to verify what actually happened inside that house. What is clear is that by the time he reached his teens, the warning signs were already stacking up. He left school without finishing, worked a string of low-level jobs, got married at 19. That marriage ended fast. In 1967, he was drafted. He served in Vietnam not in a fighting role. He worked as an armorer, a supply position away from combat. After his arrest in 1990, he told multiple interviewers that he had done terrible things in Vietnam. Combat situations, acts of extreme harm against civilians, very specific, very detailed accounts delivered with total confidence. Investigators pulled his military records and checked every single claim. None of it happened. It was completely invented, a false, traumatic past, carefully built over years to explain behavior he knew would eventually require an explanation. So, who actually was this person before 1972? Because the picture that comes out of his early years is not someone who suddenly became dangerous out of nowhere. It is someone who had been showing signs of deep problems for years, and around whom the people and systems that should have responded consistently did not. After Vietnam, he came home and married again. Within a short time, he was building a criminal record: burglary, arson, theft. His second wife later described him as someone who started fires compulsively for no clear practical reason. An army psychiatrist had actually flagged this pattern years earlier. Nobody followed up on it. He served time at Attica for burglary. He was released early after helping rescue a prison officer during the 1971 riot, a detail that would later factor into how the parole system viewed him. He returned to Watertown, married a third time, and got a job with the city's public works department. That job gave him access to neighborhoods across Watertown every single day. That is where things stand going into the spring of 1972. And then, 2 children disappear. May 1972. Jack Owen Blake, 10 years old, goes missing near his home in Watertown. He had been seen fishing with Shawcross in the area before. Shawcross's public works route ran through the same neighborhood. Jack was harmed. He did not survive. He was not found for nearly 5 months, September 5th, 1972, after an anonymous tip directed police to the location. Before that discovery, on September 2nd, 1972, 8-year-old Karen Ann Hill was approached near a bridge while visiting Watertown with her mother for the Labor Day weekend. She was harmed. Her airways were obstructed. She did not survive. Shawcross concealed her near the water. She was found the same day. Shawcross was identified, arrested. He confessed to both cases. And here is where the legal system made its first major mistake, one that would shape every single thing that came after it. Prosecutors wanted to charge him on the most serious counts available. The problem was the evidence. In Jack Blake's case, they had his confession. But physical evidence directly connecting him to the scene was thin enough that defense attorneys could challenge it in court. A more serious conviction was not guaranteed at trial. So, they made a deal. Shawcross pleaded guilty to a single count of first-degree manslaughter, covering both cases. 2 children. 1 charge. He received a maximum sentence of 25 years. During his time inside, first at Attica, then at Greenhaven Correctional Facility. At least one psychiatrist formally stated in writing that he was still a high-risk individual and that releasing him early would be a serious mistake. A parole officer also filed a written objection. The board reviewed both. They noted the concerns, and then they released him anyway. April 1987, 14.5 years into a 25-year sentence. After release, Shawcross needed somewhere to live. His parole officer placed him first in Binghamton, New York. Within days, the community found out who he was. Public pressure mounted. He was moved. Delhi, New York. Same result. Moved again. Fleischmann's, New York. Same result. Moved again. 3 towns, 3 rejections. Every community that discovered his history made clear he was not welcome. Rather than treating that response as a signal to increase supervision, the parole system made the opposite choice. His case file was sealed, removed from searchable databases so that no future community and no law enforcement agency in any other jurisdiction could pull up his record. Let that land for a second. The answer to communities saying, "This person poses a risk to us," was to make it structurally impossible for the next community to know he was coming. That was the chosen solution. In late June 1987, Shawcross and a woman named Rose Marie Wally were quietly moved to Rochester, New York, a city of 230,000 people. The Rochester Police Department received no phone call, no memo, no notification of any kind. A man who had confessed to ending the lives of 2 children had just moved into their city, and the one document that would have told them so had been deliberately locked away. Shawcross moved into an apartment at 241 Alexander Street. He got a job at a food service company chopping salads. He was quiet. He was friendly. His neighbors had no complaints. His co-workers liked him. By early 1988, he was spending his evenings driving his girlfriend Clara Neal's car slowly through the streets along the Genesee River. March 18, 1988. Dorothy Blackburn, 27, encountered Shawcross near Lake Avenue, an industrial stretch well known to local police for street-based activity. She was found by hunters near the Genesee River 6 days later, on March 24th. She had been asphyxiated. Shawcross later claimed she had become aggressive, and he'd responded by physically restraining her. There was minimal physical evidence, no witnesses. Investigators treated it as an isolated incident and moved on. No name came up. July 9th, 1988. Anna Stephan, 28, went missing. Her remains were not recovered until September 1989, 14 months later, from the river. In the intervening time, nothing new surfaced. Shawcross kept his job, maintained his 2 relationships, and kept driving the same corridor at night. A year and a half into his time in Rochester, Shawcross had not been questioned, flagged, or identified in any investigative database. To every system that should have been watching him, he simply did not exist. Then 1989 arrives, and the pace changes completely. July 29th. Dorothy Keeler, 59, who had been living rough in the area, disappeared. Shawcross told investigators she had threatened to tell his wife about his relationship with Clara Neal. Her remains were found October 21st. She had been struck with a heavy object. October 27th. Patricia Ives, 25, found at a construction site off Lyle Avenue. Shawcross offered the same story he had used for Blackburn. She provoked him. He reacted. It went further than he intended. Investigators would keep hearing that same structure. October. Frances Brown, 22. October 23rd. June. Stott, 30. This case stood out immediately. June Stott was not a street-based worker. She had no connection to Lake Avenue through that kind of activity. Her disappearance broke the pattern investigators had been building, and that break told them something important about how whoever was responsible was selecting his targets. Not through a fixed type, through opportunity. November. Marie Welch, 22. November 15th. Kimberly Logan, 30. Elizabeth Gibson, 29. Found in Wayne County, outside Monroe County jurisdiction entirely, which complicated the coordination between agencies. December 15th. Darlene Trippi, 32. Case after case, all added to a file that was expanding faster than the investigation could keep pace with. By late 1989, the FBI was in. A full behavioral profile was being assembled. The description that emerged: someone deeply familiar with the river corridor, known to the women, someone they trusted enough to accept a ride from, and likely carrying a prior offending history. Every single point of that profile matched Shawcross exactly. But nobody in the investigation could reach his name. The sealed file was sitting in a locked system that the investigation had no mechanism to access. He was invisible because the system had built his invisibility for him. December 18th, 1989. June Cicero, 34. She was known along Lake Avenue as someone experienced and careful, someone with a sharp instinct for which situations to trust. She did not survive her encounter with Shawcross. He left her near Salmon Creek, off the Genesee River Gorge. Over the 2 weeks that followed, he returned to that location multiple times. Late December, Felicia Stevens, 19, disappeared. On December 31st, a state trooper on rural patrol found a pair of jeans abandoned on the roadside. Inside, her ID card. Rochester police launched an aerial search of the river and surrounding areas immediately. That search began on January 2nd, 1990. The helicopter crew spotted what appeared to be a person lying on the surface of the frozen river below a bridge over Salmon Creek. Not Felicia Stevens, it was June Cicero. But on the bridge directly above was a parked van, and standing beside it was a man, looking down at the ice. Ground units were radioed. The van was gone by the time they arrived. They had the plate. It came back to Clara Neal. Officers tracked it to Northampton Park. A man sat in the driver's seat eating his lunch. He gave his name without hesitation. No license, he said. He had previously been incarcerated for manslaughter. He was brought in. Nobody in that interrogation room knew what they were about to hear. They had brought in a man found near a scene. They had a name. They had a van registration. What they did not have, yet, was any idea of the scale of what they were sitting across from. Shawcross settled into the chair and started talking. He explained that he had gone back to the Salmon Creek Bridge not once, but several times in the days since June Cicero's passing. He had stood on that bridge, looked down at where she lay on the ice, and then driven home, and come back the next day, and the day after that. Then he moved on to the other cases. He went through them one by one. Locations, dates, specific details that had never been released publicly. In several places, he corrected the investigators' own reconstructions, because what he remembered was more precise than what the physical evidence alone had told them. He was not guessing or confessing vaguely. He was recounting. He did not ask for a lawyer. He showed no distress. He sat in that room with the same settled calm he had shown eating a sandwich in a park while a helicopter circled overhead nearby. For every single case, his explanation followed the same pattern. Something she did, a provocation of some kind, and then he responded with extreme force that he had not planned. Every case, the same structure, every time. Investigators who were present later said the session was unlike anything they had experienced in their careers. Not because of what he described, but because of how he described it. Like someone recounting a series of minor incidents that had happened to him. Calm, sequential, completely in control. He was formally arrested on January 5th, 1990. When the sealed file was finally opened, it confirmed what the worst case reading of the situation had suggested. The 1972 cases in Watertown, the written psychiatric objections filed before his 1987 release, the parole officer who had formally opposed letting him go. 18 years of documented warnings, all of it sitting in a locked record while he lived freely in a city whose entire police force had never once seen his name. New York State Senator Christopher Mega said publicly he could not understand how someone with Shawcross's documented history had been released at all. The parole officer who had moved him to Rochester without notifying local law enforcement faced serious scrutiny. There were no satisfying answers. The decisions had been made, and the people who made them were not going to explain themselves publicly. Investigators from Monroe County, where most of the cases had occurred, coordinated with Wayne County, where Elizabeth Gibson had been found. Her case would be tried separately. The Monroe County prosecution would go first. The trial opened in Monroe County in November 1990. And right away, it became clear this was not going to be a straightforward proceeding. Shawcross pleaded not guilty by reason of mental defect. His defense team had 3 arguments ready. First, a childhood of severe mistreatment, claimed abuse by his mother and aunt that his family flatly denied. Second, the psychological damage of Vietnam, combat experiences that military records showed had never happened. Third, XYY syndrome, a chromosomal condition that some older, now discredited research had linked to elevated aggression. The defense's key witness was Dr. Dorothy Lewis, a forensic psychiatrist. Her argument was that Shawcross suffered from a dissociative disorder, that during each incident, he had entered a harmful alternate state completely separate from his normal consciousness. He was not in control, she said. He did not know what he was doing. The prosecution brought in Dr. Park Dietz, one of the most respected forensic psychiatrists in the country. Dietz was direct. He walked through the evidence methodically and asked the jury to consider what a person genuinely operating without conscious awareness would look like, and then compare that to Arthur Shawcross. 12 cases across nearly 2 years. each one carried out and then carefully concealed. Scene locations revisited repeatedly. 2 relationships maintained simultaneously throughout. A steady job held without incident. A structured, voluntary, detailed confession given calmly under questioning. And Vietnam stories that military records proved were entirely made up. Stories constructed specifically to provide a traumatic origin that did not actually exist. This, Dietz told the jury, was not someone who did not know what he was doing. This was someone who knew exactly what he was doing, and who had spent years preparing an explanation for it. The jury deliberated. They came back with guilty verdicts on all counts. 10 counts of second-degree criminal harm in Monroe County. The judge sentenced him to 25 years on each, running back to back. 250 years. He later pleaded guilty to the Elizabeth Gibson case in Wayne County and received a further full-term sentence. He was transferred to Sullivan Correctional Facility in Fallsburg, New York. He settled in without incident. He made art. He gave interviews. He became, for a certain kind of audience, a figure of dark fascination. In 2001, a portrait he painted of Princess Diana sold through a state inmate arts program. When the public found out that a convicted individual serving 250 years was making money from artwork sales, the reaction was swift. New York State shut down the Corrections on Canvas program the following year, after 35 years of operation. Arthur Shawcross passed away on November 10, 2008. Deep vein thrombosis, cardiac arrest. Albany Medical Center. He was 63 years old. He had been sentenced to 250 years and served 18 of them. Across 18 years in prison, Shawcross gave interviews to anyone who asked. Journalists, researchers, documentary crews, psychiatrists. He never ran out of things to say about himself. Every account placed some share of responsibility elsewhere. Every case had a version where he was also, in some way, a victim of what had happened. Dr. Michael H. Stone at Columbia University, who interviewed him in 2006, later described him as one of the clearest examples of an unjustified early release in American corrections history. Stone noted that Shawcross could produce the appearance of remorse on demand, and that it meant nothing. The 14 people whose lives he ended are documented in court records. Most of their names are not widely known outside of Rochester. That gap between the attention he received and the attention they did is probably the most honest way to describe what this case cost. Arthur Shawcross gave hundreds of hours of interviews. He described himself in detail to anyone who asked. He never once ran out of things to say about Arthur Shawcross. The 14 people whose lives he ended did not get that. If this case is worth sharing, share it. Subscribe for a new case, fully researched, every week.